Hell's Angel visited his late wife's grave and saw poor girl crying. What she said left him shocked. The early winter darkness crept across the cemetery, turning headstones into silent shadows against the white snow. Jack Callahan hunched his broad shoulders against the cold as his motorcycle rumbled down the narrow cemetery path. The fresh powder crunched beneath his wheels, leaving a solitary trail behind him. He'd made this journey every Sunday since Martha died. Rain or shine, snow or heat. Nothing stopped Jack from his weekly visit. Today, fat snowflakes drifted lazily from a steel-gray sky, landing on his leather jacket and melting into tiny drops that froze again almost instantly. Jack cut the engine and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. The world felt muffled under its blanket of snow, as if even sound couldn't fully reach him. He pulled off his gloves, reached into his saddlebag, and carefully removed Martha's red scarf. The soft wool felt warm against his calloused fingers. "Hey, baby," he whispered as he approached her grave. "Brought your favorite." He knelt down, ignoring the cold seeping through his jeans. The marble headstone was simple but elegant, just like Martha had been. Her name and the dates of her too-short life were carved in flowing script, with the words, "Beloved wife," beneath them. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Jack brushed away the snow that had gathered on top of the stone. His fingers, rough from years of motorcycle repairs and hard living, moved tenderly across the marble surface. "Weather's getting colder," he said, his breath forming small clouds. "You always loved the first real snow of winter." He smiled sadly. "Remember that Christmas when we rode up to the mountains? You wore this scarf the whole time." Jack unfolded the red scarf and draped it gently across the top of the headstone. The bright color stood out starkly against the gray stone and white snow, like a splash of life in this quiet place of endings. From his pocket, he pulled out a small rag and carefully wiped away the thin layer of grime that had accumulated on Martha's headstone since his last visit. He worked methodically, making sure every letter of her name was clean and visible. "The guys at the club send their love," he continued, speaking softly. "Big Mike finally fixed that old Harley he's been working on. You should see it, Martha. It purrs like a kitten now." A sharp wind gusted through the cemetery, rattling the bare branches of the oak trees. Jack shivered but didn't move to leave. These moments with Martha were all he had left. "I'm doing okay," he lied, knowing somehow that she'd see right through it even now. "The house is quiet without you, though." He fell silent, running his fingers along the edge of the headstone. 3 years had passed since cancer had taken her, but the ache in his chest felt as fresh as it had on the day she died. The Hells Angels had been his family for 20 years, but Martha had been his heart. Without her, he was just going through the motions. "I miss your laugh," he whispered. "I miss the way you'd hum while you cooked breakfast. I miss finding your hair ties everywhere." His voice broke slightly. "I just miss you, baby." Jack sat back on his heels, looking up at the darkening sky. The snowflakes were falling faster now, covering his shoulders and the arms of his leather jacket. He didn't bother brushing them away. "The doctors say I should be moving on by now." He shook his head. "Like there's some schedule for grief. 3 years and you're supposed to be all better, right?" He laughed, a hollow sound. "They don't get it. How could they?" The wind picked up again, sending a shower of snow from a nearby tree branch. Jack pulled his collar up higher and adjusted the scarf on Martha's headstone so it wouldn't blow away. That's when he noticed it, movement several rows over. At first he thought it might be an animal, but as he squinted through the falling snow, he realized it was a person, a very small person, Jack stood up slowly, his knees protesting after kneeling so long in the cold. There, about 20 yards away, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, huddled alone beside a grave. No adult in sight. Just a child with her head bowed, shoulders shaking slightly as she cried in the gathering darkness and falling snow. Jack hesitated. The sight of the little girl, alone and crying in the snow, tugged at something inside him. He glanced back at Martha's grave, as if seeking her guidance. "What would you do, baby?" he whispered. The wind answered with a gentle swirl of snowflakes. Jack took a deep breath and started walking towards the girl. His boots crunched through the fresh snow, but she didn't look up. Her small shoulders continued to shake with quiet sobs. As he got closer, Jack noticed how thin her coat looked, barely enough for the mild days of fall, let alone this bitter winter evening. Her brown hair hung in damp strands around her face, and her hands, bare and red from the cold, clutched something he couldn't quite see. Jack stopped a few feet away, suddenly uncertain. He wasn't good with kids, never had been. The guys in the club sometimes brought their children around, but Jack usually kept his distance. What did he know about comforting a crying child? "Hey there," he said softly, his deep voice gentler than usual. "You okay?" The girl's head snapped up. Her eyes, wide with surprise and rimmed red from crying, fixed on him. For a second, fear flashed across her face, probably at the sight of his weathered face and bulky leather jacket with the Hell's Angels patches. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Jack said quickly, holding up his hands. "Just checking if you're all right. It's getting dark and cold out here." She wiped her nose with her sleeve, but didn't answer. Jack looked around the empty cemetery. "Your folks around somewhere?" The girl shook her head slightly. "You're out here all alone?" Jack frowned. "That's not safe, kiddo." She looked down at the grave again. "I had to come," she said, her voice so quiet Jack had to strain to hear it. Jack studied her for a moment, then slowly lowered himself to sit on the edge of the grave marker next to hers. Not too close. He didn't want to scare her, but close enough to talk. "Mind if I sit a spell? I was just visiting my wife." He nodded back toward Martha's grave. The girl glanced in that direction, then back at Jack. Some of the wariness left her expression. "Your wife died?" Jack nodded, his throat suddenly tight. 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jack almost smiled. Here was this little thing, clearly in pain herself, offering him comfort. "Thank you," he said. "It's hard sometimes." They sat in silence for a few moments. The snow continued to fall around them, the flakes catching in the girl's hair. She shivered. "You must be freezing," Jack said. "How long have you been out here?" She shrugged. "A while?" Jack hesitated, then slowly removed his scarf, not Martha's red one, but the plain black one he'd wrapped around his own neck. "Here," he offered, holding it out to her. "This might help." The girl looked at the scarf, then at Jack, surprise evident in her eyes. After a moment, she reached out and took it, wrapping it around her thin neck. It was comically large on her, winding several times and still hanging down. "Thank you," she mumbled into the folds of wool. "You're welcome," Jack said. He nodded towards the grave she sat beside. "Someone you know?" The girl's eyes filled with fresh tears. She looked down at the grave marker, running her fingers over the name etched in the stone. "No," she said finally. "I don't know them." Jack's eyebrows drew together in confusion. "You don't know them? Then why—" "I feel like I should," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "I feel connected here, like I belong." Jack didn't know what to say to that. He studied the grave marker. It was weathered and partially obscured by snow, but he could make out the name. Martha Callahan. His heart stopped. The girl was sitting at Martha's grave. His Martha. And she felt connected to her? A child who claimed not to know her? "What's your name?" Jack asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Emily," she said softly. "Emily Harrison." Jack stared at her, a strange feeling spreading through his chest. Emily. The name meant nothing to him, but something about her face, the shape of her eyes, perhaps, stirred a strange sense of recognition. "And you don't know the person buried here?" he asked again, needing to be sure. Emily shook her head. "No, but sometimes." She hesitated. "Sometimes I dream about her. Is that weird?" Jack swallowed hard. "You dream about her? About Martha?" Emily's eyes widened. "You know her name?" "Yeah," Jack said, his mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah, I know her name." Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he looked from Emily to Martha's grave and back again. The wind picked up, sending a fresh flurry of snowflakes swirling around them. He pulled his leather jacket tighter, trying to gather his thoughts. "Why do you feel connected to her?" he asked finally, keeping his voice gentle despite the storm of questions in his mind. "To Martha?" Emily's small fingers traced the letters of Martha's name on the headstone. The snow had started to stick to her hair, little white flakes clinging to the brown strands. "I don't know exactly," she said softly. "I just do." Jack waited, sensing there was more. The cemetery had grown darker around them as twilight deepened. In the distance, the iron gate creaked in the wind. Emily reached into her coat pocket with trembling fingers. "I found something. At home." "What did you find?" Jack asked, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. Emily pulled out a folded piece of paper, carefully protected in a plastic sandwich bag. She handled it like it was made of glass, slowly unwrapping it with her cold, reddened fingers. "This," she said, handing it to Jack. It was a photograph, worn around the edges and creased from being folded. Jack took it carefully, his large gloved hands dwarfing the small image. As he looked at it, his breath caught in his throat. Martha. It was definitely Martha, younger than when he'd known her, maybe in her mid-20s. Her smile was the same, though, that gentle curve of her lips that always made his heart skip. She stood in front of a small apartment building he didn't recognize, wearing a simple sundress, her hand resting on a wrought iron railing. "Where did you get this?" Jack asked, his voice rough with emotion. Emily pulled her knees up to her chest, hugging them tightly. "I found it in a box in our attic. My parents, they're not my real parents." Jack looked up from the photo. "You're adopted?" Emily nodded, snowflakes tumbling from her hair with the movement. "They told me when I was 7. I found some papers with my name on them, adoption papers." She took a shaky breath. "The box had other stuff too. Baby things. And this picture." "And you think—" Jack couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the possibility forming in his mind. "I don't know what to think," Emily said, her voice small against the vast silence of the snow-covered cemetery. "But when I saw her picture in the newspaper obituary section at the library, it was the same face. So I came here." Jack stared at the photograph again, noticing details he'd missed at first glance. The slight tilt of Martha's head. The way she stood with her weight on one foot, like she always did when posing for pictures. This was definitely his Martha. But Martha had never mentioned a child, never even hinted at one. They'd talked about having kids when they first got married, but after a while the subject had faded away, like so many dreams do. Jack had assumed Martha had made peace with it, just as he had. "How long have you been coming here?" he asked, still staring at the photo. "Almost every week since I found out," Emily said. 6 months, maybe? Sometimes I just sit and talk to her." She looked down, embarrassed. "That probably sounds crazy." "No," Jack said quickly. "No, it doesn't sound crazy at all. I do the same thing." They sat in silence for a moment, the snow falling more heavily now, creating a blanket of white across the cemetery. Jack handed the photo back to Emily, watching as she carefully returned it to its plastic protection. "Emily," he said finally, his voice catching. "How old are you?" "9, she replied. "Almost 10 in April." Jack did the math quickly. 10 years ago, he and Martha had been married for less than a year. Before that, there had been a period when they were apart. A rough patch before they finally settled down together. Could Martha have... The possibility struck him like a physical blow. Martha might have had a child she gave up for adoption, a child she never told him about, a child who was now sitting beside her grave, looking for answers. The snow fell heavier now, covering Jack's shoulders and gathering on his beard. He couldn't take his eyes off the photograph in Emily's small hands. His world was shifting, tilting on its axis. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the soft whisper of snowflakes landing on their clothes. "Where exactly did you find this?" Jack asked finally, his voice rougher than he intended. Emily carefully tucked the photo back into its plastic protection. "After my grandma died last year, we went to clean out her house." She pulled her coat tighter around her thin frame. "There was a box in the attic with my name on it. My parents said Grandma kept it for me." Jack brushed snow from Martha's headstone again, his fingers lingering on her name. "Your grandmother, was she your adoptive mom's mother?" Emily nodded, snowflakes tumbling from her brown hair. "Yeah, she was the one who helped them adopt me. That's what Mom said." Jack tried to piece it together in his mind. Could Martha have known this woman? Had she arranged the adoption herself? Martha had never mentioned any of this, not in all their years together. "Did your parents tell you anything about your birth mother?" Jack asked, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Emily shook her head. "Not much, just that she was young and couldn't take care of me." Her small face pinched with the effort not to cry. "And that she wanted me to have a good life." That sounded like Martha, always putting others first, always making the hard choices if she thought they were right. But why had she kept this from him? "The box," Jack continued gently. "What else was in it besides the photo?" Emily dug the toe of her worn sneaker into the snow. "Baby stuff. A little blanket, some papers, a card that just said, 'For my daughter' on the front." She looked up at Jack suddenly. "How did you know her? Martha?" Jack's throat tightened. "She was my wife." Emily's eyes widened. "Your wife?" Her voice was barely audible above the wind. You're Jack?" Now it was Jack's turn to be surprised. "You know my name?" "It was on the back of the photo. Martha and Jack's place." Emily recited the words carefully, like she'd memorized them. But there wasn't any man in the picture. Jack closed his eyes briefly. That must have been their first apartment, the one Martha had moved into before they got married. He remembered her excitement about having her own place, how she'd painted the kitchen yellow all by herself. "I must have been taking the picture," he said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment. The cemetery had emptied completely now. In the distance, streetlights were beginning to glow through the falling snow, creating halos of light in the gathering darkness. "There's something else," Emily said finally. She reached into her coat pocket again, digging deeper this time. "Something I've always had." Jack watched as she pulled out a small bundle of fabric. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a scarf. A red scarf, faded with time but unmistakable. "This was with me when I was a baby," she said. "My mom kept it all these years." Jack's hand moved automatically to his jacket, where Martha's red scarf was tucked safely inside. With numb fingers, he pulled it out and held it beside Emily's. They were identical. The same deep red color, though Emily's was more faded. The same pattern of tiny white snowflakes embroidered along the edges. Even the fringe was the same, though Emily's was frayed with age. Martha wore this scarf every winter, Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. It was her favorite. Emily reached out hesitantly and touched Martha's scarf with her fingertips. Mine too, she said simply. Jack stared at the two scarves, side by side in the falling snow. The truth he'd been fighting to understand finally crystallized in his mind. Martha had a child. This child, before she married him. She had given her baby up for adoption, had carried that secret all those years, and had never told him. And now, somehow, that child had found her way back. Back to Martha. Back to him. Jack noticed Emily shivering in the cold. The snow was falling harder now, and the thin jacket she wore couldn't be keeping her warm enough. Without thinking, he unwrapped Martha's scarf from his hands. Here, he said gently. You look cold. Emily hesitated, looking at the red scarf with wide eyes. But it was hers. She'd want you to have it, Jack said, surprised by how certain he felt about that. Martha never liked seeing anyone cold. The little girl took the scarf with careful fingers, as if it might break. Thank you, she whispered, wrapping it around her neck. The red fabric swallowed her small frame, and she snuggled into it. It smells nice. Jack nodded, his throat tight. He'd kept that scarf in a plastic bag with a few drops of Martha's perfume. He couldn't bear to let her scent fade away completely. So, he said, clearing his throat, who brought you here today? Your parents? Emily shook her head, snowflakes tumbling from her hair. I came by myself. I'm not supposed to, but... She stared at the ground. I just wanted to see her grave again. Jack frowned. You walked here alone. How far is your house? Not too far, just a few blocks. Emily kicked at the snow with her sneaker. I told Mom I was going to my friend Caitlin's house after school. Jack rubbed his bearded chin, unsure what to say. He'd never been one to lecture kids about safety, but the thought of this small girl walking alone through town bothered him. What are your folks like? He asked instead. Emily's face brightened a little. They're nice. Dad works at the bank. Mom stays home and does art sometimes. She paints pretty pictures. She tugged on the scarf. They don't know I found the box with the photo. I didn't tell them. Why not? She shrugged, looking suddenly much older than 9. I didn't want to make them sad. Mom gets worried when I ask about my real mom. Your birth mother, Jack corrected gently. The woman who raised you is your real mom, too. Emily nodded. That's what Dad says. She glanced up at Jack. Do you have kids? The question caught him off guard. No, he said softly. Martha and I, we never had children. What would Martha have said if she knew her daughter was sitting here now? Had she wanted to tell him about Emily? Had she been afraid to? The questions swirled in his mind like the snow around them. What's your last name, Emily? He asked. Harrison. Emily Harrison. She tilted her head. What's yours? Callahan. Jack Callahan. Emily tested the name. Callahan, she repeated. So that would have been my name if she kept me. Jack's heart squeezed painfully in his chest. I suppose it would have been. Emily Callahan, she said thoughtfully. That sounds nice. Before Jack could respond, the sound of tires crunching on snow broke through the quiet. Headlights swept across the cemetery as a car pulled up quickly to the gates. A car door slammed, and a woman's voice called out urgently, Emily! Emily! Emily jumped to her feet, eyes wide with panic. That's my mom! A man and woman hurried through the gates, their faces tight with worry. The woman spotted Emily and rushed forward, snow flying around her boots. "Emily Harrison! We've been looking everywhere for you!" She dropped to her knees in the snow, grabbing Emily's shoulders. "Caitlin's mother called when you weren't at their house. Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" The man, her father, stood behind his wife, his face a mixture of relief and stern disapproval. Then his eyes fell on Jack, taking in the leather jacket with the Hell's Angel patch, the motorcycle boots, the weathered face. "Who are you?" he asked sharply. Jack rose to his feet slowly, hand slightly raised to show he meant no harm. "Jack Callahan, sir. I found your daughter here alone. Thought it best to stay with her until someone came." Mrs. Harrison finally seemed to notice Jack, too, and she pulled Emily closer to her side. "We appreciate you looking after her," Mr. Harrison said stiffly, "but we'll take it from here." Mrs. Harrison was already guiding Emily toward the cemetery gates, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "Come on, honey. It's freezing out here. What were you thinking?" Emily looked back over her shoulder at Jack, her eyes wide and pleading. She touched Martha's red scarf around her neck, a silent message passing between them. "Thank you," she mouthed as her parents led her away. Jack stood motionless in the falling snow, watching until they disappeared into their car. Even as the taillights faded into the distance, he could feel the connection between them lingering in the cold winter air, as real and tangible as the identical scarves they now each possessed. Jack's motorcycle roared through the quiet streets, the sound echoing off the snow-covered houses. The encounter with Emily and her parents had left him shaken. As he pulled into the driveway of the small house he'd once shared with Martha, his mind raced with questions that had no answers. The house stood dark and silent. He hadn't bothered turning on the porch light before leaving that morning. Why would he? There was no one waiting for his return. The key turned in the lock with a familiar click. Jack stepped inside, flipping on lights as he moved through the empty rooms. The house felt colder than usual tonight, or maybe it was just the chill that had settled in his bones at the cemetery. "Martha?" he whispered to the empty living room. "What didn't you tell me?" He hung his leather jacket on the hook by the door, where Martha's yellow raincoat still hung. He couldn't bring himself to move it, even after all this time. In the kitchen, he poured himself a finger of whiskey, then made it 2. The amber liquid burned going down, but it didn't clear his head or warm his heart. The identical scarves couldn't be a coincidence. The photo was unmistakably Martha, younger, but with that same gentle smile that had first drawn him to her. And the girl's eyes. There was something in them that reminded him of his wife. Jack set the glass down hard on the counter. He needed answers. The attic stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed up into the darkness. He hadn't been up here since Martha died. There had been no reason to sort through the boxes of memories, no strength to face the reminders of what he'd lost. He pulled the chain on the single bulb that hung from the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the harsh light. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, each labeled in Martha's precise handwriting. Christmas, photos, winter clothes. Martha had always been organized, while Jack had been the one to leave tools scattered across the garage and boots in the middle of the hallway. "Where would you hide something from me?" he murmured, scanning the neat rows of boxes. Jack began with the ones labeled personal. He found photo albums, high school yearbooks, cards he had given her over the years. Nothing that suggested she'd had a child. An hour passed. 2. The attic grew colder as the night deepened, but Jack barely noticed. He moved methodically from box to box, searching for anything that might tell him about Emily. In the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of old magazines, he found a small wooden chest he didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled like the others. The wood was smooth, polished, cherry, maybe. Martha had always loved cherry wood. Jack pulled it toward him, his heart beating faster. The lid wasn't locked, but it stuck slightly from disuse. When it finally opened, the scent of cedar and something else, something faintly sweet, drifted up. Inside lay a small bundle of papers, birth certificates, partial ones, with sections missing or redacted. Medical records from St. Mary's Hospital dated nearly 10 years ago. A few Polaroid photos of Martha in a hospital bed, looking exhausted but smiling faintly at something just out of frame. And beneath it all, a sealed envelope with Jack written on it in Martha's handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened it, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a single page, creased and slightly yellowed with age. "My dearest Jack," it began. Jack's throat tightened as he read Martha's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, then you found what I couldn't bring myself to tell you while I was alive. I hope someday you'll understand why I kept this secret. Before we met, there was a child, a beautiful baby girl I had to give up. The reasons were complicated and painful, and I've carried the weight of that decision every day since. I wanted to tell you so many times, but fear kept me silent. Fear that you would look at me differently. Fear that my past would change what we had. It was wrong of me to keep this from you, and I'm sorry. If fate ever brings her back into our lives, please know that giving her up was the hardest thing I've ever done." The letter went on, but Jack's vision blurred with tears. He carefully folded it and placed it back in the envelope. Tomorrow he would read the rest. Tomorrow he would try to understand. For now he knew one thing for certain. He needed to go back to the cemetery. Emily deserved to know the truth, whatever that truth might be. And Jack needed answers that only Martha's grave, and perhaps Emily herself, could provide. He packed the documents carefully back into the wooden chest and carried it downstairs. As the clock on the mantel struck midnight, Jack made his decision. He would return to the cemetery first thing in the morning and wait for Emily, hoping she might come back to the place where their paths had crossed. Jack arrived at the cemetery as the first pale light of dawn broke over the horizon. He hadn't slept much. After finding Martha's letter, he had spent hours staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. Now, with the wooden chest safely locked in his saddlebag, he parked his motorcycle outside the cemetery gates and walked the familiar path to Martha's grave. The snow from yesterday had stopped falling, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. His boots crunched through the fresh powder, leaving deep footprints behind him. The early morning air bit at his face, but he barely noticed. He'd brought a small camping chair this time, setting it up beside Martha's headstone. From a thermos, he poured steaming coffee into a cup, and the rich aroma rose in the cold air. "I don't know what to think, Martha," he said quietly, his breath forming clouds in front of him. "Why didn't you tell me?" Next to his chair, he placed a second thermos filled with hot chocolate and a paper bag containing 2 blueberry muffins, the kind Martha used to love. He wasn't sure if Emily would return, or if her parents would allow it after seeing her with a stranger yesterday. But he had to try. Jack sipped his coffee and watched the cemetery slowly brighten as the sun climbed higher. The caretaker nodded to him from across the way, used to seeing the big man with the leather jacket visiting regularly. Jack nodded back, then returned to his quiet vigil. 2 hours passed. Jack paced to keep warm, read Martha's letter 3 more times, and waited. Just as he was beginning to lose hope, he spotted movement near the cemetery entrance. Emily was walking slowly between the gravestones, her small figure bundled against the cold. Behind her followed a woman Jack recognized as Laura Harrison, Emily's adoptive mother. The woman's face was a mixture of concern and curiosity, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. Jack stood up, suddenly nervous. He brushed snow from his jeans and waited as they approached. "You came back," he said to Emily, his voice gentler than usual. Emily nodded, her eyes serious beneath her wool hat. "I told Mom everything. About the picture and the scarf. She said we should talk to you." Laura Harrison stepped forward, extending her gloved hand. "I'm Laura, Emily's mother." Her voice carried a slight tremor, but her gaze was steady. "She couldn't stop talking about you last night, about the scarves being the same." Jack shook her hand, feeling the delicate bones beneath the soft leather of her glove. "Jack Callahan. I was Martha's husband." He gestured to the headstone beside them. Laura nodded. "Emily showed me the photograph. It was quite a shock." "For both of us," Jack agreed. He turned to Emily. "I brought hot chocolate, if you'd like some." Emily looked up at her mother, who nodded permission. Jack poured the steaming drink into the cup lid and handed it to the girl. She accepted it with a small smile. "I found something last night," Jack said, his voice low. "Some papers Martha kept hidden." Laura tensed visibly. "What kind of papers?" Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope with Martha's letter. "A letter she wrote, and some hospital records, from St. Mary's." "That's where I was born," Emily said quietly, looking up from her hot chocolate. "Yes," Laura confirmed, her voice tight. "That's what her original paperwork says." Jack took a deep breath. I believe Martha might have been Emily's birth mother." The words hung in the cold air between them. Emily's eyes widened, and she looked from Jack to the gravestone, then back again. "Why would she give me away?" Emily whispered, her voice small and hurt. Laura put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her close. Her eyes met Jack's, full of questions and worry. "I don't know everything yet," Jack admitted. "But I want to find out. For all of us." He looked down at Martha's grave, now cleared of snow, the marble cold and silent with its secrets. "If Martha was your mother, Emily, then there's a story here we all deserve to know." Jack knelt down in the snow to meet Emily at eye level. The cold seeped through his jeans, but he barely noticed. He needed her to see his face, to know he wasn't hiding anything. "I wish I had all the answers for you right now," he said, his voice softer than usual. "But the truth is, Martha never told me about having a child before we met." Emily clutched the hot chocolate cup with both hands, the steam rising between them. Her eyes, deep brown and serious, studied his face. "Was she nice?" Emily asked, her voice small against the winter stillness. Jack smiled, the first real smile that had touched his face in months. "The nicest person I ever knew. She helped everyone. Stray cats, neighbors who needed groceries, even tough guys like me." He glanced at Laura, who stood watching them with arms crossed, her posture protective, but her expression softening slightly. "She sounds like Emily," Laura said quietly. "Always bringing home injured birds or giving her lunch to kids who forget theirs." Jack nodded, something warm spreading in his chest despite the cold. "Martha was like that too. Couldn't stand to see anything hurting." Emily looked down at the scarves, the matching red patterns now draped together across her lap. "Do you think she wanted me?" Laura stepped forward quickly, her boots crunching in the snow. "Emily, honey." Jack held up his hand gently. "It's okay." He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I found a letter Martha was writing. She said, if she ever comes back to me. That tells me she was thinking about you, missing you." But why would she give me away if she wanted me? Emily's voice cracked slightly, and Jack felt something crack inside him too. Sometimes... Jack paused, looking at the gravestone beside them. Sometimes people make hard choices because they think it's best for someone they love. Martha grew up pretty rough. Maybe she thought you deserved better than what she could give you back then. Laura moved closer to her daughter, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. We don't want Emily confused or hurt by this, she said to Jack, her voice firm but not unkind. She's been through enough already, losing her grandmother last month. Jack nodded. I understand. I don't want to upset anyone. But I think we all deserve to know the truth, whatever it is. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card. It was worn around the edges, showing the name of the motorcycle repair shop where he worked. He handed it to Laura. My number's on there. If you have questions, or if Emily wants to know more about Martha, you can call me, or not. It's up to you. Laura took the card, studying it before slipping it into her coat pocket. Thank you. We need some time to process all this. Emily suddenly reached out, her small gloved hand touching Jack's arm. Can you tell me more about her? What she liked? What made her laugh? Jack swallowed hard, memories flooding back. Martha dancing in their kitchen to old records. Martha reading on the porch swing. Martha teasing him about his motorcycle magazines. She loved blueberry muffins, he said, gesturing to the paper bag he'd brought. And she read mysteries all the time, had stacks of them by the bed. I like mysteries too, Emily whispered, her eyes wide. Laura checked her watch. We should go, Emily. Dad's waiting with breakfast. Emily looked up at her mother, then back to Jack. Will you come back tomorrow? Please, I want to hear more stories about her. Jack glanced at Laura, waiting for her permission. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded slightly. Same time? Jack asked. Emily nodded eagerly, a small smile breaking through her serious expression. I'll bring my book to show you. It's a mystery. I'll be here, Jack promised, and I'll bring more hot chocolate. As Emily and Laura turned to leave, Emily looked back over her shoulder. Thank you for telling me she was nice. Jack watched them walk away, their figures growing smaller against the white landscape. When they disappeared through the cemetery gates, he turned back to Martha's grave. What am I supposed to do now? He whispered to the silent stone. But for the first time in a long while, the emptiness that followed didn't feel quite so hollow. Later that afternoon, Jack sat in a corner booth at Rosie's Diner, his fingers drumming nervously against his coffee cup. He'd arrived 20 minutes early, showered and wearing his cleanest flannel shirt under his leather jacket. The Hell's Angel patch on his back felt suddenly conspicuous in the family-friendly restaurant. The bell above the door jingled, and Jack's head snapped up. Emily entered first, her face brightening when she spotted him. Laura followed closely behind, and behind her came a tall man with glasses and a cautious expression. Daniel Harrison kept one hand protectively on his daughter's shoulder as they approached the table. Hi, Jack. Emily slid into the booth across from him, her energy a stark contrast to the tension radiating from her parents. Hello, Emily. Jack's voice came out gruffer than he intended. He cleared his throat and nodded to the adults. Mrs. Harrison, and you must be Mr. Harrison. Daniel extended his hand after a moment's hesitation. Daniel, thanks for meeting somewhere public. Jack understood the implication, but didn't take offense. Of course. A waitress appeared, saving them from the awkward silence. Emily ordered hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. The adults settled for coffee. I brought some things, Jack said once the waitress left. He reached into a worn leather satchel and pulled out a small photo album. Pictures of Martha. Thought you might want to see them. Emily's eyes widened. She reached for the album, then paused, looking to her parents for permission. Laura nodded, and Emily pulled it closer. The first photo showed Martha on their wedding day, her smile wide and genuine, flowers in her hair instead of a traditional veil. She didn't like fancy things, Jack explained. Said happiness was the best decoration. Emily traced Martha's face with her fingertip. I have her smile, she whispered. Jack noticed it too. The same slight curve at the corners, the same dimple on the right cheek. Yeah, you do. Daniel leaned forward, studying the photos with an appraising eye. When did you two meet? About 12 years ago, Jack said, watching Emily flip carefully through the pages. I was in a rough spot. My bike broke down outside the diner where she worked. She brought me coffee while I was fixing it, then kept bringing refills until I finished. That sounds like something you would do, Emily, Laura said softly. Jack pointed to another photo, Martha in their small garden, holding up a misshapen tomato with pride. She could grow anything. Had this way with plants. Said they just needed patience and love, same as people. I kill all my plants, Daniel admitted, the first hint of his guard lowering. Martha would have given you grief about that, Jack said with a small smile. Then she'd have brought you cuttings to try again. The waitress returned with their drinks. Emily took a big sip of her hot chocolate, leaving a whipped cream mustache on her upper lip. Jack handed her a napkin without comment, the gesture automatic and natural. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, watching the interaction. What exactly are you hoping will come from all this, Mr. Callahan? Just Jack is fine, he said, meeting Daniel's gaze. And I'm not hoping for anything specific, He paused, searching for words. Martha was the best person I knew. Finding out she had this whole part of her life I didn't know about. I want to understand. And Emily deserves to know where she came from. We're her parents, Daniel said firmly. We've raised her since she was 3 weeks old. I'm not questioning that, Jack replied quietly. Not for a second. Emily looked up from the album. Dad, look. She has the same necklace Grandma Harrison gave me. She pointed to a photo of Martha wearing a simple silver pendant. Daniel's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. You're right, sweetie. I have more at home, Jack offered. Letters, keepsakes. If you want to see them someday. Laura exchanged a look with her husband. We're just concerned about Emily getting hurt. This is all very new. Jack nodded. I understand that. I don't want to cause any pain, but I think Martha would have wanted the truth to come out, eventually. Daniel studied Jack for a long moment, then glanced at his daughter's absorbed expression as she continued to flip through the album. We can continue exploring this, Daniel finally said, his voice measured. Slowly. Together. Jack felt something in his chest unclench. Thank you. Emily looked up, her face serious. Can I ask you something important? Sure, kiddo. Did Martha like chocolate chip cookies or oatmeal raisin better? The unexpected question made Jack laugh, a real laugh that felt foreign in his throat. Oatmeal raisin. Said chocolate chip was too ordinary. Emily beamed. Me too. Dad says that makes me weird. Well, Jack said, catching Daniel's eye across the table, maybe it just makes you Martha's daughter. The evening sky turned purple-black as Jack rode back to the small house on Maple Street. His motorcycle's headlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the falling snowflakes that swirled in its beam. The meeting with Emily and her parents kept playing in his mind, how the little girl's face had lit up looking at Martha's photos. Jack parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the darkened windows. Since Martha died 8 months ago, he'd avoided being here more than necessary. The clubhouse had become his refuge, surrounded by his brothers, who understood grief even if they rarely spoke of it. He unlocked the front door and flipped on the lights. The house felt cold, even with the heat running. Jack hung his jacket on the hook by the door, Martha's empty hook still beside it, and moved through the quiet rooms. In the kitchen, he opened the refrigerator, grabbed a beer, then changed his mind and closed the door. He needed a clear head tonight. There were answers hidden somewhere in this house. Martha's answers. "Where did you hide your secrets?" he whispered to the empty room. The cedar box he'd found last night sat on the kitchen table, its contents spread out. The torn hospital papers, the church pamphlet, the unfinished letter. Not enough to tell the whole story, but a beginning. Jack moved methodically through the house, starting with places he hadn't thoroughly checked before. He pulled out dresser drawers completely, checking for anything taped underneath. He felt along the backs of framed photographs for hidden pockets. He ran his hands along the undersides of shelves. In their bedroom, he sat on the edge of the bed they'd shared and looked around with new eyes. The room was simple. Martha never cared for fancy things. A pine dresser, a small bookshelf, the quilt her grandmother had made. The bookshelf caught his eye. Martha loved to read. Even when money was tight, she'd find a few dollars for a used paperback. Jack crossed to it and began examining each book, flipping through pages, looking for notes or markings. An hour later, with nothing to show for his efforts, Jack rubbed his tired eyes. He was about to give up when he noticed the Bible on the bottom shelf. Martha wasn't particularly religious. They'd only attended services on Christmas and Easter, but she'd kept her childhood Bible. He pulled it out and opened the worn cover. Inside was Martha's girlhood handwriting. Martha Elizabeth Collins, age 8. He flipped through the tissue-thin pages, scanning for markings. A folded paper slipped out from Psalms. Jack opened it carefully. It was a receipt from St. Catherine's Church, dated 9 years ago. The memo line simply said, "Donation, Women's Support." Jack frowned, trying to place the name. St. Catherine's wasn't their local church. He'd never heard Martha mention it. He went to the kitchen and opened his laptop. A quick search showed St. Catherine's was across town, in a neighborhood they rarely visited. The church website mentioned various ministries, including Catherine's Haven, described as a safe place for expectant mothers in difficult circumstances. Jack's breath caught. A home for pregnant women who needed help. 9 years ago. Exactly when Emily would have been born. He dug back into the cedar box and picked up the church pamphlet he'd found earlier. It wasn't from St. Catherine's, but the date matched. 9 years ago. He turned it over and noticed something he'd missed before. A handwritten phone number in the corner, with the initials SR beside it. Jack stared at these pieces of the puzzle. A donation to a home for mothers in need. A church pamphlet from the same time. Initials he didn't recognize. And a little girl with Martha's smile who somehow found her way to her mother's grave. "What happened, Martha?" he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" He tucked the receipt carefully back into the Bible and placed it on the kitchen table with the other items. For the first time since the cemetery, he felt he had a real lead, somewhere concrete to look for answers. Tomorrow, he would visit St. Catherine's Church and find out what they knew about Martha Collins and the child she gave up for adoption. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, with sunlight gleaming off fresh snow. Jack woke before his alarm, after a night of fitful sleep filled with dreams of Martha. He showered quickly, dressed in clean jeans and his least intimidating jacket. No patches or club insignia. Today wasn't about being a Hell's Angel. Today was about being the husband who never knew his wife's deepest secret. He tucked the St. Catherine's receipt carefully into his wallet. The address he'd found online showed the church was in Riverdale, a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town. Jack chose to take his truck instead of the motorcycle. He needed to blend in, not draw attention. As he drove, Jack rehearsed what he might say. How do you walk into a church and ask if they remember a woman who gave up her baby 9 years ago? Would they even talk to him? Would there be records? His hands tightened on the steering wheel as doubts crept in. St. Catherine's was smaller than he expected, a white stone building with a modest steeple and stained glass windows that caught the morning light. The parking lot was nearly empty on a Tuesday morning. Jack sat in his truck for several minutes, gathering courage. Inside, the church was hushed and cool. Candles flickered near a side altar, and a faint scent of incense hung in the air. Jack stood awkwardly just inside the door, his heavy boots suddenly too loud on the stone floor. "Can I help you?" A woman's voice startled him. Jack turned to see an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes watching him from behind a small welcome desk. "I hope so," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "I need information about something that happened here about 9 years ago." The woman's smile remained, but her eyes grew cautious. "I'm Mrs. Winters, the parish secretary. What kind of information are you looking for?" Jack reached for his wallet and pulled out the donation receipt. "My wife made a donation to your women's ministry, to Catherine's Haven." He paused, unsure how to continue. "Mrs." Winters looked at the receipt, then back at Jack. "Catherine's Haven helps many women in difficult situations. All their information is confidential." "I understand that," Jack said. "But this is important. My wife passed away 8 months ago. I think she may have had a child before we met. A child she gave up for adoption through your program." The secretary's expression softened. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Callahan. Jack Callahan." "Mr. Callahan, our records about adoptions are sealed for the protection of everyone involved." Jack felt frustration rising. "The child has already found her mother's grave. She's 9 years old and has questions I can't answer." Mrs. Winters hesitated. "Let me get Sister Regina. She's been with Catherine's Haven since it started. If anyone would know about this situation, it would be her." She disappeared through a side door, leaving Jack alone in the quiet church. He wandered towards the front, looking at the statues and candles without really seeing them. Everything in his life had changed in just 2 days. The woman he thought he knew completely had kept the biggest secret imaginable. The sound of footsteps made Jack turn. A small nun in a simple blue habit approached, her face lined with age but her steps quick and purposeful. "Mr. Callahan, I'm Sister Regina." She extended her hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Mrs. Winters tells me you're inquiring about Catherine's Haven." Jack nodded. "My wife was Martha Callahan, Martha Collins before we married. I have reason to believe she stayed here around 9 years ago and gave birth to a daughter who was adopted." Sister Regina studied him carefully. "Martha Collins," she repeated. "Yes, I remember her." Jack felt his heart skip. "You do?" The nun nodded slowly. "She was here for nearly 4 months, a quiet young woman with sad eyes, very determined to do what she thought was best for her child." "Then it's true," Jack whispered. Sister Regina gestured toward a wooden bench. "Let's sit down, Mr. Callahan." They sat side by side, facing the altar. Sister Regina folded her hands in her lap. "I can't share details about the adoption process. Those records are sealed by law." "I understand," Jack said, trying to hide his disappointment. "But can you tell me anything? The child, Emily, she found her way to Martha's grave. She has questions I can't answer." Sister Regina's expression softened. "Martha was very brave. Whatever led her to make the decision she did, I believe it came from love." "Was she afraid? Alone?" Jack needed to understand. "Those are questions only Martha could answer," Sister Regina said gently. "But I will tell you this. We keep records of every mother who stays with us. There should be letters, perhaps personal belongings." Jack looked up sharply. "Letters?" Sister Regina nodded. "Many mothers write letters to their children, in case they wish to make contact someday. They're kept in our sealed files." Could you check?" Jack asked, hope rising in his chest. The nun was quiet for a long moment. "It's not our usual procedure, but if the child has already found her birth mother's grave—" She sighed. "I will look into our archives. If Martha left anything for her daughter, I will find it." That afternoon, Jack arrived at the cemetery earlier than the agreed time. The day had warmed enough to melt patches of snow on the pathways, though winter's chill still lingered in the air. He sat on the bench near Martha's grave, watching a cardinal hop between bare branches of a nearby tree. Its bright red color reminded him of Martha's scarf. He had called Daniel Harrison from St. Bartholomew's parking lot, sharing what little he had learned from Sister Regina. To his surprise, Daniel had suggested they meet at the cemetery that afternoon. "Emily hasn't stopped talking about Martha since yesterday," he had explained, his voice a mixture of concern and resignation. Jack stood when he spotted them walking up the path, Daniel holding Emily's small hand. She wore a purple knit hat today, but Martha's red scarf was still wrapped around her neck. The sight of it made Jack's chest tighten. "Hi, Jack," Emily called, waving with her free hand. "Hello there," Jack replied, smiling despite his nervousness. He nodded to Daniel. "Thank you for coming." Daniel shrugged. She wanted to hear more about her, about Martha. His hesitation revealed how difficult this situation was for him, too. They settled on the bench, Emily between the two men. She looked up at Jack expectantly. "Did you bring more pictures?" Jack nodded and pulled out a small photo album from inside his jacket. "I found this last night. It has pictures from when Martha and I first met." He opened to the first page, showing a younger Martha with longer hair, standing beside a garden fence. This was her favorite place. She grew vegetables every summer, said there was nothing better than eating something you watched grow from a tiny seed. Emily traced the image with her finger. "She looks happy." "She was," Jack said. "Martha loved simple things. Rainy days for reading books, first snow in winter, finding the perfect tomato in her garden." "What was her favorite food?" Emily asked. Jack chuckled. "Blueberry pancakes. She'd eat them any time of day. Sometimes we'd have breakfast for dinner just because she wanted pancakes." Emily grinned. "I love blueberry pancakes too." Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside them, but remained silent. "Martha had a beautiful singing voice," Jack continued, turning to another photo of Martha decorating a Christmas tree. "She sang in the church choir, not because she was religious, but because she loved the music." "Did she sing to you?" Emily asked. Jack nodded, his throat tightening. "Sometimes, when I couldn't sleep, she'd sing old folk songs her grandmother taught her." Emily leaned against him slightly. "I like singing too." They went through more photos. Martha at the beach, building a snowman, laughing on their front porch. With each image, Jack shared a small story, a memory that painted Martha as the woman he knew. Kind, funny, stubborn sometimes, but always loving. "She volunteered at the animal shelter," Jack said, showing Emily a picture of Martha holding a tiny kitten. "She couldn't bear to see anything suffering. That's how we got our cat, Oscar. Martha said he looked at her with eyes that needed a home." "We have a cat, too," Emily said. "His name is Boots because his feet are white." The afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the graves. Daniel checked his watch but didn't interrupt. Jack could tell the man was watching his daughter's face, seeing her absorb every word about Martha. "Was she ever sad?" Emily asked suddenly. Jack paused, considering how to answer honestly. Yes, he said finally. Everyone gets sad sometimes. Martha had days when she seemed far away, like she was carrying something heavy inside her. Now I think... He glanced at Daniel, who nodded slightly. Now I think she might have been thinking about you. Emily picked at a thread on her coat. The question that followed came in a small voice, barely above a whisper. Do you think she would have loved me, if she had kept me? Jack felt his heart crack open. He turned to face Emily fully, gently placing his hands on her small shoulders. Emily, listen to me. Martha loved you. She loved you enough to make the hardest choice a mother can make. I didn't know about you until now, but I knew Martha's heart. And I know without any doubt that she loved you with everything she had. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. Really? Really, Jack said firmly. The kind of love Martha had doesn't just go away. Even when she couldn't be with you, she loved you. I believe that with my whole heart. The next morning arrived with clear skies and a brightness that seemed at odds with the weight in Jack's chest. He sat on his motorcycle outside St. Bartholomew's, waiting. He'd arrived 20 minutes early, unable to sleep past dawn with Martha's letter so close. The Harrisons' blue sedan pulled into the parking lot at exactly 10 o'clock. Jack stood straighter as Daniel, Laura, and Emily stepped out. Emily spotted him and waved, still wearing the red scarf that connected her to a mother she'd never known. Morning, Jack said, nodding to the family. Thank you for coming. Daniel's face looked tired but determined. We talked about it all night. Emily deserves to know where she came from. Laura squeezed her husband's hand. And we need to know too. The church building stood quiet and dignified against the winter sky. Its red brick walls and stained glass windows had witnessed countless stories of heartbreak and hope. Now it would reveal another piece of Martha's hidden past. Sister Agnes met them at the entrance, her elderly face creased with kindness. Please, follow me, she said softly, leading them through the hallway to a small meeting room. I found the envelope Martha left with us. She was very specific about who could open it. The room was simple: a wooden table, several chairs, and a crucifix on the wall. A large envelope sat in the center of the table. Sister Agnes gestured for them to sit. Martha said this was to be opened only in the presence of her child and whoever was caring for her. She looked at Emily with gentle eyes. She wanted to make sure you were safe and loved before these words reached you. Emily slid into a chair between her parents, looking small and nervous. Jack sat across from them, his hands resting on the table to keep them from shaking. I'll give you privacy, Sister Agnes said. She placed a box of tissues on the table before quietly closing the door behind her. The four of them stared at the envelope. Emily was written across it in Martha's flowing handwriting. Should I? Laura asked, looking at Jack. Jack shook his head. I think Emily should open it. It was meant for her. Emily reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. It's from my real mom? Your birth mother, Laura corrected gently. But yes, from Martha. Emily carefully broke the seal and pulled out several handwritten pages. She looked at them, then at Jack. Will you read it, please? Jack took the pages, recognizing Martha's handwriting immediately. His throat tightened as he cleared it and began to read. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, you've found your way back to me, even if I'm no longer here to hold you. I've asked that this letter only be given to you when you're with people who love you, because what I have to tell you isn't easy. First, I want you to know that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. You weren't unwanted. You were desperately loved. So loved that I couldn't bear to keep you in the dangerous life I was trapped in. Before you were born, I was married to a man named Robert Kelly. He seemed kind at first, But after we married, he became violent and controlling. When I discovered I was pregnant with you, I knew I had to protect you from him. Robert had sworn he'd never let me leave, and I believed him. With help from a women's shelter and Sister Agnes, I made a plan. I disappeared while Robert was away on business. I changed my name back to my mother's maiden name, Callahan, and moved across the state. I stayed at St. Bartholomew's until you were born. Holding you was the greatest joy I've ever known. Your tiny fingers, your beautiful eyes. You were perfect in every way. But Robert was searching for me. He'd hired people to find us. I couldn't risk him discovering you. The hardest day of my life was placing you in Sister Agnes's arms, knowing someone else would watch you grow. But I made her promise to find a family who would love you completely, protect you fiercely, and give you the stable home I couldn't provide. I hope the family who raised you has been everything I prayed for. I hope they've shown you kindness and patience and taught you to be brave. Know that not a day passed when I didn't think of you. Every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary Tuesday, you were in my heart always. All my love, your mother. All my love. Martha. Jack's voice broke on the final words. He looked up to see tears streaming down Laura's face. Daniel had his arm around Emily, who sat very still, absorbing every word. She gave me up to keep me safe, Emily whispered. Jack nodded, unable to speak. Jack carefully folded Martha's letter and placed it back in the envelope. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Emily's sniffles as Laura gently dabbed the girl's tears with a tissue. Sister Agnes knocked softly before returning with a tray of hot tea. "I thought you might need this," she said, placing the tray on a small side table. "Take all the time you need." After the nun left, Daniel leaned forward, his protective instincts visible in the tightness around his eyes. "We need to discuss how to handle this information," he said quietly to Jack and Laura, while Emily sipped her tea. "There's more here than Emily might be ready to process all at once." Laura nodded, stroking Emily's hair. "Daniel's right. Martha mentioned this Robert person, someone dangerous. That's a lot for a 9-year-old to understand." Jack rubbed his weathered hands together, considering. Martha was protecting Emily. That's the most important part for her to understand now. The rest, the details about Robert, maybe that's something for when she's older. Emily looked up from her tea. "I can hear you talking about me," she said, her voice small but clear. "Don't I get to know everything?" The three adults exchanged glances. Jack saw the struggle on the Harrisons' faces, the desire to protect their daughter warring with the need for honesty. "Emily," Laura said gently, "sometimes grown-ups need to figure out the best way to explain complicated things. We're not trying to keep secrets from you. We just want to make sure you understand in a way that won't scare you." Daniel nodded. "Your mom's right, sweetheart. This is a big story about your life, and we want to tell it right." Jack watched Emily's face closely. There was so much of Martha in her expression. The same quiet determination. The same thoughtful eyes. "I think," Jack said slowly, "that Emily deserves the truth. Not every detail, maybe, but the heart of it. Martha was brave. She made a hard choice to keep Emily safe. That's something to be proud of, not something to hide." Sister Agnes returned with a plate of cookies. "If I may," she said, setting them down, "I knew Martha during that time. She was so young, but so certain about what needed to be done. She talked about her baby girl every day, how smart she'd be, how kind. She wanted Emily to know someday that she was deeply loved, even as she was being let go." Emily reached for a cookie, considering these words. "Did she ever come back? To check on me?" Sister Agnes shook her head. "No, dear. She couldn't risk it. But she left this letter, and she made a donation every year on your birthday to help other mothers and babies here. Jack felt a fresh wave of love for Martha wash over him. Even with her secrets, she had never stopped caring, never stopped trying to make things right. I think, Laura said, taking Emily's hand, we should go home and talk about all this tonight when we're comfortable and can take our time. Daniel agreed. We'll tell you everything we know in a way that makes sense, and if you have questions, we'll answer them the best we can. Emily looked at Jack. Will you come too? You knew her. You can tell me what she was like. Jack felt something catch in his throat. He looked to the Harrisons, unsure. Laura nodded. Yes, Jack should be there too. We're all connected to you now, Emily. That evening, snow fell softly outside the Harrison home. In the warm living room, Emily sat on the couch between Laura and Daniel, with Jack in an armchair pulled close. On the coffee table lay Martha's letter and several photos Jack had brought. Martha in her garden, Martha laughing on their wedding day, Martha knitting the red scarf. So, Daniel began, his arm around Emily, your birth mother Martha loved you very much. She was in a dangerous situation and made the bravest choice she could to keep you safe. She found people who would protect you, Laura continued, and she hoped someday you might find out the truth. Jack leaned forward. Then Martha built a new life. She never forgot you, but she found ways to be happy again. And when I met her, she was the kindest person I'd ever known. Emily's small fingers touched the photos. Was she really afraid all the time? Not all the time, Jack said softly. She was careful, but she found joy. She loved to garden and knit. She loved to help people, and I think, in her quiet way, she was always hoping you were safe and happy. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out, taking Laura's hand in one of hers and Jack's rough hand in the other. Daniel placed his hand over theirs, completing the circle. I have two families, Emily said simply. The one that wanted to keep me safe, and the one that's been taking care of me all this time. The adults sat in silence, hands joined as the snow continued to fall outside, covering everything in a blanket of quiet white. The morning sunlight sparkled across the fresh snow, turning the world into a glittering wonderland. Emily stood at the Harrisons' front window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched for Jack's motorcycle. She wore her red scarf, Martha's scarf, carefully wrapped around her neck. Do you see him yet? Laura asked, coming to stand beside her daughter. Emily shook her head. Not yet. She pressed her small palm against the cold window. Do you think he changed his mind? Laura smiled gently. He'll be here. He promised. Daniel entered the room carrying Emily's winter coat. The winter market will be packed today. Make sure you stay close to us, okay? Emily nodded, but her attention remained fixed on the street outside. When the rumble of a motorcycle engine finally broke the morning quiet, her face lit up. He's here. But instead of just Jack, 3 motorcycles pulled up to the curb. Jack dismounted first, followed by 2 other riders, an older man with a silver beard and a middle-aged woman with braided hair peeking out from under her helmet. Who are those people? Emily asked, suddenly shy. Laura looked to Daniel, who peered through the window with concern etching his features. Those must be Jack's friends. Outside, Jack seemed to be having a serious conversation with his companions. After a moment, the other 2 riders nodded, started their motorcycles, and rode away with a wave. The doorbell rang, and Emily ran to answer it. Hey, kiddo, Jack said, standing awkwardly on the porch. His cheeks were red from the cold. Sorry about that. My friends wanted to join us, but I told them maybe another time. That's thoughtful, Laura said, helping Emily into her coat. We appreciate it. Jack nodded. I figured today should be simple. Just us. Daniel grabbed the car keys. Ready for the winter market, everyone? The drive to the market was quiet, with Emily sandwiched between Jack and Laura in the back seat. The tension from yesterday's revelations hung in the air, but it was softer now, like a fog beginning to lift. Look, Emily pointed as they approached the market. Colorful stalls lined the town square, and an enormous Christmas tree stood in the center, decorated with twinkling lights and handmade ornaments. Martha loved this market, Jack said softly. She'd spend hours looking at every single craft. As they walked through the market, Emily seemed to grow lighter with each step. She stopped at a stall selling wooden toys, her eyes wide as she watched a miniature train circle a tiny village. That's beautiful craftsmanship, Daniel said, bending down beside her. Martha would have loved this, Jack added, standing a respectful distance away. Laura watched the three of them, her husband, her daughter, and this man who had suddenly become part of their lives. There was caution still, but something else too. Something like understanding. Hot chocolate, Emily exclaimed, pointing to a stall with steaming cups. Can we get some? Absolutely, Daniel said, reaching for his wallet. Jack stepped forward. Let me. When Daniel started to protest, Jack added quietly, Please. It would mean a lot. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. They found a bench near the giant Christmas tree and sat with their hot chocolates, watching children build snowmen and throw snowballs in the cleared area. Did Martha like hot chocolate? Emily asked, whipped cream dotting her upper lip. Jack smiled. She did, with extra marshmallows, just like you. Emily smiled back, and for a moment her face held such a resemblance to Martha that Jack had to look away. A group of carolers gathered near the tree and began to sing Silent Night. Emily leaned against Laura, sipping her hot chocolate. Jack sat quietly, respectful of the family moment but clearly moved by the music. As the afternoon wore on, they visited more stalls. Emily chose a small wooden ornament shaped like a heart, and Jack bought her a knitted hat that matched her red scarf. Daniel found handmade candles that Laura admired, and Laura purchased fresh bread that filled the car with its warm scent as they drove home. By the time they returned to the Harrison home, the sun was setting. Emily was drowsy, her head nodding as she clutched her new ornament and hat. Thank you for today, she said to Jack as they stood on the porch. It was the best day. Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It was for me too, kiddo. Laura carried a sleepy Emily upstairs to get ready for bed, while Daniel and Jack talked quietly in the living room. Later, when Laura came downstairs after tucking Emily in, she found the two men sharing coffee, their conversation easier than before. She's asleep, Laura said. She was smiling when she drifted off. Jack nodded, relief visible in his weathered face. That's good. That's really good. For the first time since Martha's letter had opened this new chapter in all their lives, the house felt peaceful. A family finding its way forward, one small step at a time. Jack turned his motorcycle toward home as darkness fell. The day at the winter market with Emily and the Harrisons had left him feeling lighter than he had in months. For those few hours, the weight of grief had lifted just enough for him to breathe. But now, alone again with the rumble of his bike beneath him, his thoughts returned to Martha and all the secrets she had kept. The house was silent when he walked in, the way it always was now. He hung his leather jacket on the hook by the door and stood for a moment in the hallway. Before Emily, before the discovery at the cemetery, he'd been avoiding most of the house, sleeping on the couch instead of their bed, eating takeout instead of using the kitchen Martha had loved. But now, each room felt like it might hold another piece of the puzzle. I need to understand, he said aloud, his voice rough in the quiet. "Help me understand, Martha." Jack moved to the bedroom first. He'd already gone through her nightstand and the closet, finding the cedar box with the hospital papers and church pamphlet. But he hadn't checked the high shelf in the back of the closet, the one Martha needed a step stool to reach. He dragged the wooden step stool from the hallway and climbed up, shining his phone's flashlight into the shadowy corner. Dust coated everything, making him sneeze. His fingers found something solid, a shoebox, pushed far back against the wall, where someone would only find it if they were really looking. Jack carried it to the bed and sat down, turning on the lamp. The box was plain cardboard, worn at the corners. No label, nothing to indicate what might be inside. His heart hammered against his ribs as he removed the lid. Inside lay a small collection of items, carefully preserved. A hospital bracelet. A tiny knit baby hat in pale yellow. A Polaroid photo of Martha, much younger, holding a newborn wrapped in a blanket. Her face in the picture showed both joy and heartbreak, emotions Jack had never seen combined that way before. "Oh, Martha," he whispered, touching the photo with gentle fingers. "Why didn't you tell me?" Beneath these items was a small leather-bound journal. Jack opened it with trembling hands and recognized Martha's neat handwriting immediately. The first entry was dated 9 years and 7 months ago. "I felt her move today," Martha had written. "My little girl. I talk to her all the time, tell her how much I love her, how I wish things were different. But they aren't different, and I need to be stronger than I've ever been. I need to love her enough to give her up." Jack swallowed hard, turning pages slowly. The journal documented Martha's pregnancy, her fears, her determination to protect her child from a man she referred to only as him. Jack's jaw tightened at the vague references to threats and violence. The entries stopped abruptly after the birth. The final page held just one sentence. "I hope someday she'll understand that letting her go was the hardest and most loving thing I've ever done." Jack closed the journal and set it aside, his vision blurred with tears. At the very bottom of the box, he found an envelope with his name written on it in Martha's handwriting. It looked newer than the other items, perhaps added to the box later. His fingers hovered over the sealed envelope. This wasn't something Martha had intended for Emily or the adoption agency. This was for him. Whatever was inside, Martha had written it knowing he might someday find it. Did he want to know? What if it changed everything he thought he knew about their life together? What if it didn't? Jack set the envelope down on the bedspread, staring at his name in Martha's familiar script. The answers he sought were right there, waiting. But now that the moment had come, he wasn't sure he was ready. He picked up the baby hat instead, running his thumb over the soft, faded yarn. Emily had worn this once. Martha had held her daughter, if only briefly. These weren't just artifacts of a secret past. They were precious memories Martha had preserved, alone. The envelope remained unopened on the bed as Jack sat in silence, surrounded by the fragments of Martha's hidden life. Jack sat motionless on the bed for nearly an hour, Martha's envelope balanced on his knee. The house creaked and settled around him, but he barely noticed. Outside, the winter wind picked up, rattling the windows with gentle persistence. The bedside clock ticked past midnight. "All right," he finally whispered, his voice sounding strange in the empty room. "I need to know." With calloused fingers that suddenly felt too large for such delicate work, Jack broke the seal on the envelope. The paper inside was folded neatly, covered with Martha's familiar handwriting, the same writing that used to leave him grocery lists and birthday cards. He unfolded it carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. "My dearest Jack," the letter began. He paused, drawing a deep breath. In his mind, he could hear Martha's voice reading the words. If you're reading this, it means you've discovered the truth I've kept hidden. I hope you've met her by now, our Emily. Yes, I think of her as ours, even though you never knew her. I've imagined 1,000 times what it would be like if you two found each other. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he continued reading. I need to explain why I never told you. When we met, I was rebuilding my life. Emily was already with her adoptive family, and I was trying to learn how to breathe again after making the hardest choice any mother could make. I told myself I would tell you someday when the time was right, when we knew each other better. Jack remembered those early days, Martha's quiet sadness that he had attributed to her difficult childhood. How many times had she almost told him? How many opportunities had he missed to see her pain? Then we fell in love, and I grew more afraid. Afraid you wouldn't understand. Afraid you wouldn't love me the same if you knew I had abandoned my own child. And maybe, this is the hardest part to admit, afraid you wouldn't love her either. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. Had he given Martha reason to believe he wouldn't have accepted her child? Had something in him made her afraid to trust him with her deepest truth? I convinced myself I was protecting all of us by keeping this secret. I told myself Emily was happy with her family, that disrupting her life would be selfish. But the truth is, I was a coward. Every year on her birthday, I would go to the church where I last held her and light a candle. Every Christmas, I bought her a gift and kept it in this box. Every night, I prayed she was safe and loved. Jack looked back at the box and saw what he had missed earlier. Small wrapped packages tucked in the corner, each labeled with a year. Birthday presents Emily had never received. If you and Emily have found each other, Jack, it means God has answered my deepest prayer. But I know this must be confusing and painful for you. You have every right to feel betrayed. You have every right to be angry with me. I only ask one thing. Please don't let my mistakes keep you from loving her. Jack's vision blurred. He wiped roughly at his eyes with the back of his hand. Emily deserves to know she was wanted. She deserves to know I loved her enough to give her up when I couldn't protect her myself. And she deserves to know the man I married, the man with the biggest heart behind the toughest exterior, the man I wish could have been her father from the beginning. The last paragraph was written in shakier handwriting, as if Martha had been crying when she wrote it. I'm sorry, Jack. I'm sorry I didn't trust our love enough. I'm sorry I kept this part of myself hidden from you. Whatever you decide to do with this truth now, please know I loved you completely, even with this secret between us. Jack let the letter fall to his lap. His throat felt tight, his chest hollow. Martha had carried this burden alone for years while they shared a home, a bed, a life. She had never trusted him enough to share her deepest pain. And maybe she had been right not to trust him. What would he have done if Martha had told him she had a child she'd given up? Would he have understood? Would he have opened his heart to a child he never knew existed? Jack stood up abruptly, unable to sit still with these thoughts. He paced the small bedroom, feeling the walls closing in. Martha had believed in him, believed he could be a father to Emily. But he wasn't so sure. What did he know about raising a child? About healing a heart that had already been broken by abandonment once? He was a biker, rough around the edges. The Harrisons were proper parents with a proper home. They knew how to care for Emily, how to give her structure and stability. All he had were stories about a mother she never knew, and his own inadequate attempts at comfort. Jack stuffed the letter back in its envelope and returned it to the box. He closed the lid firmly, as if containing something dangerous. The surge of purpose he'd felt earlier had drained away, replaced by a cold, heavy doubt that settled in his bones. Martha had been wrong about him. He wasn't the man she thought he was. The morning light filtered weakly through Jack's bedroom window, catching dust particles that floated aimlessly in the air. He hadn't slept. His eyes burned from staring at the ceiling all night, Martha's words echoing in his mind like a broken record. Jack's phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Laura Harrison. "Emily is hoping to see you at the cemetery at 10. She has so many questions." He looked at the clock. 8:37 a.m. His chest tightened. What could he possibly tell Emily that wouldn't hurt her more? The truth was that her own mother hadn't trusted him enough to share her existence. What kind of man did that make him? Jack picked up the phone to reply, then set it down again. Picked it up. Set it down. Finally, he typed, "Not feeling well today. Maybe tomorrow." The lie felt bitter on his fingers. He pressed send before he could change his mind. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared as Laura typed a response. Jack turned the phone face down. He couldn't bear to see her disappointment, or worse, her understanding. He got dressed mechanically. Jeans, t-shirt, boots. His leather jacket felt heavy as he slipped it on, like it carried all the weight of his doubts. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. The motorcycle roared to life beneath him, the familiar vibration usually bringing comfort. Today, it just felt like an escape route. Jack pulled away from the curb, accelerating faster than necessary down the quiet street. He didn't have a destination in mind. Away. That was all he knew. Away from Emily's hopeful face. Away from the Harrisons' cautious trust. Away from Martha's grave and all the accusations he felt emanating from the cold marble. The wind stung his face as he rode, his helmet left hanging on the handlebars at home. Good. He welcomed the physical discomfort. It was easier to focus on than the tightness in his chest. The highway stretched before him, and Jack opened the throttle. The trees blurred into a green smear on either side. His mind raced faster than his bike. What did he know about being a father figure? His own dad had been a shadow, more absence than presence. Jack had learned early that depending on people meant getting hurt when they left. How could he promise Emily anything different? And what about the Harrisons? They were good people. Stable. The kind of family Emily deserved. All he would do is complicate things, confuse her. She'd already lost one parent, her birth mother. What if she got attached to him and then discovered he wasn't cut out for this? He'd be letting her down all over again. The gas gauge dipped toward empty, forcing him to pull into a roadside station around noon. While the tank filled, Jack checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Laura. 2 text messages. Emily is really disappointed. And then, she's gone to the cemetery anyway, said she'll wait. Jack's stomach twisted. He imagined Emily sitting alone by Martha's grave, watching the cemetery entrance for his motorcycle. Waiting. Hoping. He paid for the gas and got back on his bike. Still, he couldn't make himself turn around, not yet. He needed more time to think, to figure out what to say. Jack rode until mid-afternoon, stopping at a diner he'd never been to before. He ordered coffee and barely touched it, watching it grow cold as he stared out the window at nothing. A family sat in the booth across from him. Mother, father, little girl about Emily's age. They were laughing about something, the girl's eyes crinkling with happiness as her father pretended to steal a fry from her plate. Such a simple moment, such an impossible one for Jack to imagine himself in. The sky was darkening when Jack finally pointed his bike back toward town. His joints ached from the long ride in the cold. His heart felt just as numb. The cemetery gates were still open when he arrived, though they'd close soon. Jack hesitated at the entrance, then slowly walked his bike through rather than riding it, respecting the quiet of the place. Martha's grave looked different somehow. Maybe it was the gathering shadows of evening, or maybe it was knowing what he now knew. Jack approached cautiously, half expecting to find Emily still there, stubbornly waiting. She wasn't. But something small and white was propped against the headstone, a folded piece of paper partially protected from the damp ground by a rock. Jack knelt and picked it up with trembling fingers. Emily's careful handwriting filled the page, some of the letters backward in the way of children still mastering their skills. "Dear Jack, I waited for you all day. Did I do something wrong? Mom said you weren't feeling good, but I think maybe you don't want to tell me more about my real mom. It's okay if you don't want to see me anymore. I understand. Grown-ups are busy. Thank you for the stories. Emily." The careful printing blurred as Jack's eyes filled. The simple acceptance in her words, the resignation that people leave, cut deeper than any anger would have. She expected to be disappointed. At 9 years old, she already knew not to hope too much. Jack folded the note carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, right next to his heart. The weight of his mistake settled over him like a physical thing, heavy and cold. Jack sat at his bike for a long time, Emily's note burning a hole in his pocket. The cemetery lights flickered on as darkness settled fully across the gravestones. A night watchman appeared in the distance, keys jangling as he prepared to close the gates. With a deep breath, Jack started his motorcycle and rode away from Martha's grave. But instead of heading home to his empty house and its haunting memories, he turned toward the edge of town, where the Hellfire Brotherhood kept their clubhouse. The low-slung building sat back from the road, its weathered wood exterior lit by a single neon sign and string lights along the porch. Half a dozen motorcycles gleamed under the outdoor lamp. Jack parked among them, his movements slow and heavy as he dismounted. Music drifted through the walls, classic rock turned down low enough for conversation. Jack pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the familiar smell of leather, motor oil, and cheap beer washed over him. A few heads turned as he entered, nods of acknowledgement passing between brothers who understood the code. "You're welcome here, but we'll leave you alone until you're ready to talk." Jack scanned the room until he found who he was looking for. In the corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee rather than beer, sat Marcus. At 65, he was the oldest active member of the Brotherhood, his beard more salt than pepper, his face lined with deep creases that mapped decades of hard living and harder wisdom. Marcus had been there when Jack joined, had been there when Jack met Martha, had been there at their wedding, and again at her funeral. If anyone could make sense of the mess in Jack's head, it would be him. Jack made his way to the booth, nodding at the bartender who immediately poured a coffee and slid it across the counter for him to take. "Evening, brother," Marcus said, his voice gravel rough from years of cigarettes he'd finally quit when his first grandchild was born. "You look like hell warmed over." Jack slid into the seat opposite him. "Feel worse than that." Marcus studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "This about your Martha's girl?" Jack's head snapped up. "You knew?" The older man shrugged one shoulder. "Suspected. Martha came to me once, years back, when she was pregnant. Before she knew you. She was scared, needed money to get away from the baby's father. I helped her leave town for a while." He took a sip of coffee. "Never mentioned it because it wasn't my story to tell." Jack stared at his untouched coffee, a knot forming in his throat. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Some wounds run so deep, you think sharing them will break whatever good thing you found." Marcus leaned forward. "She loved you, Jack. Sometimes when you love someone that much, you get scared of losing them." Jack pulled Emily's note from his pocket and smoothed it on the table. Marcus read it without picking it up, his weathered face softening. "I ran," Jack admitted, the words barely audible. "Kid needs more than I can give her." Marcus snorted. "That right? And who decides what you can give? You or her?" "I'm not father material." "Says who?" Marcus challenged. "That bastard who raised you? The one who couldn't see what was right in front of him? A son worth being proud of? Jack flinched. I don't know how to do this. Nobody does, Marcus said simply. Every damn one of us is making it up as we go along. But I watched you with Martha, saw how you loved her, how you took care of her when she got sick. He tapped Emily's note with one thick finger. That kind of love isn't something you learn. It's something you are. What if I fail her? You already are, Marcus said bluntly. By not showing up. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Remember when you first brought Martha around? Some of the guys gave you grief about settling down, called you soft. Jack nodded. And what did you say? That being strong enough to love someone wasn't soft. It was the hardest, bravest thing a man could do. Exactly. Marcus's eyes were kind, but unyielding. This little girl isn't asking you to be perfect. She's just asking you to be there, to not vanish like everyone else has. He pushed Emily's note back toward Jack. Martha saw something in you worth trusting with her heart. Question is, was she right? The words landed like a punch to Jack's gut. He took a deep breath, then another. She was right, he said finally, his voice steadier than it had been all day. And I'm being a coward. Then go fix it, Marcus said simply. Brotherhood means facing your fears, not running from them. And that little girl? She's your family now too. Martha made sure of that. Jack folded the note carefully and put it back in his pocket. For the first time since reading Martha's letter, his path seemed clear. Thank you, brother, he said, standing up. Marcus nodded. Don't thank me. Just don't let that kid spend another night thinking she's not worth sticking around for. The winter sunrise painted the sky in pale pink and gold as Jack pulled up to the Harrison home. He'd barely slept, spending most of the night thinking about Marcus's words and what he needed to say. His motorcycle rumbled to silence in the quiet neighborhood street, and he sat for a moment, gathering his courage. The modest two-story house looked warm and well-loved, with a wreath still hanging on the front door from Christmas. A child's bicycle leaned against the garage, partially covered with a tarp to protect it from the snow. This was Emily's home, the place where she had been raised with care and stability, things Jack wasn't sure he could provide. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't abandon her. Not again. Jack walked up the cleared path to the front door, his boots heavy on the concrete. He wore his cleanest jeans and a dark blue sweater Martha had given him, not his usual leather and denim. His wedding ring, which he normally wore on a chain around his neck, was back on his finger today. He needed to feel Martha's presence for what he was about to do. Before he could knock, the door opened. Daniel Harrison stood there, still in his bathrobe, holding a coffee mug. His expression hardened when he saw Jack. You've got some nerve showing up here, Daniel said, his voice low but sharp. Do you have any idea what you did to her yesterday? Jack nodded, accepting the anger. I know. I'm here to apologize to all of you, especially Emily. Is she awake? She cried herself to sleep. Laura's voice came from behind her husband. She appeared beside him, already dressed for the day but with dark circles under her eyes. She thought you'd abandoned her, just like her birth mother did. The words cut deep, exactly as they were meant to. Jack flinched but didn't back away. May I please come in? Just to talk, Jack said. I owe you an explanation. Daniel and Laura exchanged a glance, communicating silently in the way long-married couples often do. After a moment, Daniel stepped aside. 10 minutes, he said firmly. The living room was warm and cluttered in the comfortable way of a family home. Photos of Emily through various ages lined the walls. Her first day of school, birthday parties, Halloween costumes. Jack took a seat on the edge of the couch when Laura gestured for him to sit. "I found a letter from Martha," Jack began, his voice rough with emotion. "She wrote it for me, explaining everything. Why she gave Emily up. Why she never told me about her." He looked down at his hands. "It hit me hard. Made me question whether I was the right person to be in Emily's life." "So you just disappeared?" Laura asked. Jack shook his head. "I was wrong. I let my fear get the better of me." He looked up, meeting their eyes directly. "Martha thought she was protecting both Emily and me by keeping her secret, but all she did was deny us both the chance to know each other sooner." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm not trying to replace you. You're Emily's parents in all the ways that matter. But I was Martha's husband, and I believe she would want me to be part of Emily's life, if you'll allow it." Daniel's posture remained rigid, but Laura's expression softened slightly. "What changed between yesterday and today?" Daniel asked. Snow still blanketed the ground, but patches of earth showed through where the sun had warmed the surface. Jack arrived 30 minutes early, brushing snow from Martha's headstone and clearing a small area where they could all stand comfortably. His hands trembled slightly as he worked, not from cold, but from nervous anticipation. He placed a small bouquet of winter flowers, white carnations and greenery, against the stone, and stepped back. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Martha," he whispered. "I wish you were here to guide me through this." The sound of crunching snow made Jack turn. The Harrison family approached along the cemetery path, Daniel walking protectively close to Emily, Laura just behind them. Emily wore the red scarf Martha had knitted, its bright color a stark contrast against her dark blue coat. Jack took a deep breath and stepped forward to meet them. Emily stopped several feet away, her young face a mixture of hurt, confusion, and hope. "Hello, Emily," Jack said softly. "Thank you for coming." Emily didn't respond, her gaze fixed somewhere near his boots. Laura placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We're here to listen," Daniel said firmly. Jack nodded and knelt down in the snow to be at Emily's eye level. The cold immediately seeped through his jeans, but he barely noticed. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "I promised I would be here yesterday, and I broke that promise. That was wrong of me." Emily finally looked up, her eyes searching his face. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart," Jack said quickly, the endearment slipping out naturally. "You didn't do anything wrong at all. This was about me being scared." "Scared of what?" she asked. Jack glanced at Martha's headstone, drawing strength from her presence. "I found a letter from your birth mother, from Martha. She explained why she had to give you up, and why she never told me about you." Emily's eyes widened. "What did it say?" Jack looked to Laura and Daniel, who nodded their permission. "She wrote that she was afraid," Jack explained gently. "She was running from someone who might have hurt you both. And later, when she met me, she was afraid I might not understand." "Was she afraid of you?" Emily asked directly. Jack shook his head. "No. She was afraid I might not love her anymore if I knew the truth. And she was afraid I might not want to love you." He swallowed hard. "She was wrong about that." "Then why didn't you come yesterday?" Emily's question was pointed but not angry. "Because I got scared too," Jack admitted. "I was afraid I wouldn't be good enough for you, that I'd let you down. And then I did the very thing I was afraid of doing." Emily considered this, her brow furrowing in thought. The winter wind rustled through the bare trees around them, carrying the sound of distant traffic. "My mom and dad," she looked back at the Harrisons. "They told me that being brave isn't about never being scared. It's about doing something even when you are scared." Jack nodded, a small smile touching his lips. They're right about that. Are you still scared? She asked. Yes, Jack answered honestly. I'm scared of making mistakes, but I'm more scared of not being in your life. He hesitated, then added, if that's what you want. Emily looked back at Laura and Daniel again. They both smiled encouragingly. We've talked about this, Laura said gently. Whatever you decide is okay with us. Emily turned back to Jack. I was sad when you didn't come. I thought maybe you didn't want to know me after all. I'm sorry I hurt you, Jack said. I promise to try harder. To be honest with you, even when it's difficult. For a long moment, Emily just looked at him, her young face serious and thoughtful. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck in a tight hug. Martha would want us to be friends, she whispered against his shoulder. Jack closed his eyes, overwhelmed by emotion as he carefully returned the embrace. Over Emily's shoulder, he saw Daniel and Laura watching, their expressions a mixture of caution and acceptance. Thank you, Jack mouthed silently to them. As Emily stepped back, she kept hold of his hand. Can you tell me more stories about Martha? The happy ones? Jack nodded, feeling a weight lift from his chest. I'd like that very much. The Harrison home glowed with warm light against the darkening winter afternoon. Jack hesitated on the front porch, feeling strangely out of place without his leather jacket. He had gone home to change after the cemetery, trading his usual biker attire for a simple flannel shirt and clean jeans. It was a small gesture, but one he hoped would show respect for the conversation ahead. Emily opened the door before he could knock, her face brightening. You came. I said I would, Jack replied with a gentle smile. He held up a small paper bag. I brought something for us to talk about. Laura appeared behind Emily, her expression cautious but no longer hostile. Come in, Jack. Daniel's making coffee. The living room was modest but comfortable. Family photos on the walls, a bookshelf overflowing with children's stories, and a quilt draped across the back of the sofa. Jack sat where Laura directed, perched awkwardly on the edge of a cushioned armchair. Daniel entered with a tray of coffee mugs and hot chocolate for Emily. The atmosphere was stiff, but not unfriendly as they settled around the coffee table. So, Daniel began, once everyone had their drinks. We need to talk about what happens next. Jack nodded, his hands wrapped around the warm mug. I want to be clear about something first. I'm not here to take Emily away from you. You're her parents. You've raised her, loved her, been there for her when I didn't even know she existed. Laura's shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you for saying that. But I'd like to be part of her life, Jack continued. If that's something we can all agree on. Emily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up eagerly. Like we could visit each other? And maybe I could see your house where Martha lived? Jack glanced at the Harrisons, waiting for their response rather than answering directly. Daniel leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. Laura and I have talked a lot about this. We want what's best for Emily, and we believe that includes knowing where she came from. He paused. But we need to be careful about how we do this. I agree completely, Jack said. Laura set her mug down. We thought maybe we could start with supervised visits. Maybe once a week? You could come here, or we could meet somewhere neutral like the park. That sounds reasonable, Jack said, relief evident in his voice. And if that goes well, Daniel added, we could gradually adjust the arrangement. Maybe eventually Emily could visit your home, with one of us present at first. Jack nodded, grateful for their openness. I'd like to fix up Martha's old sewing room, make it a proper place for Emily to stay when she visits, if that day comes. Emily's eyes widened. I could have my own room at your house? Someday, sweetheart, Laura said gently. We're going to take this slowly, okay? Emily nodded, though her excitement was visible. Can I still visit Martha's grave with Jack sometimes? The adults exchanged glances. I think that would be fine, Daniel said, as long as one of us knows when and where you're going. Jack reached for the paper bag he'd brought. I wanted to show you something. He carefully withdrew 2 items, Martha's red scarf that Emily had been wearing, and the smaller, faded infant scarf that had been left with Emily as a baby. These belong together, he said simply. Just like all of us now. Emily reached out, touching both scarves with gentle fingers. Can we keep them somewhere special, so they won't get lost again? Laura looked thoughtful. We have that display shelf in the hallway. We could put them there, where we can all see them. A reminder, Daniel added, that Emily has a big family who loves her. Jack watched as Emily carefully laid the scarves together on the coffee table, arranging them so they overlapped slightly, the faded infant scarf partially covered by the brighter adult one, like they were embracing. Just like Martha would have wanted, Emily said softly. And in that moment, looking at the scarves and the people gathered around them, Jack felt something shift inside him. The pain wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something else, something that held both loss and hope together in the same breath. The Harrisons' kitchen felt different on Sunday afternoon, warmer somehow, filled with the rich aroma of pot roast and the gentle clatter of Laura setting the table. Jack stood in the doorway, a small potted plant in his hands, watching Emily arrange napkins with careful precision. You didn't have to bring anything, Daniel said, appearing beside him. Jack shrugged. Martha always said never show up empty-handed. He held up the small houseplant with tiny white flowers. African violet. She grew these all over our house. Laura smiled, taking the plant. It's lovely. Emily, look what Jack brought. Emily touched one of the soft, purple-white petals. Did Martha like flowers? Loved them, Jack said, settling into the chair Daniel offered. Our back porch looked like a jungle in summertime. The kitchen was modest but inviting. Yellow walls, well-worn countertops, and a round oak table big enough for 4. Family photos hung on the refrigerator door alongside Emily's school artwork. It felt lived in and loved. Nothing like the quiet emptiness of Jack's house. Can you help me with the gravy, Emily? Laura asked, and Emily hurried to her side. Jack watched them work together, the easy way they moved around each other, finishing tasks without needing words. Family rhythm, something he'd almost forgotten. Beer? Daniel offered, opening the refrigerator. Water's fine, Jack replied. Haven't touched alcohol since Martha got sick. Daniel nodded with newfound respect and poured him a glass of ice water. Soon they gathered around the table, steam rising from bowls of mashed potatoes and gravy, slices of pot roast, and bright green beans. The food reminded Jack of Sunday meals Martha used to make. Simple, but made with care. We usually say grace, Daniel explained, extending his hands to Laura and Emily. Jack hesitated only a moment before completing the circle, taking Emily's small hand in his right and Daniel's firm grip in his left. After the prayer, Emily looked up eagerly. Can you tell us a Martha story while we eat? Jack smiled, serving himself some potatoes. Any particular kind of story you want to hear? Something happy, Emily decided, her fork poised mid-air. Jack thought for a moment. Well, Martha loved Christmas more than any other time. Our first December together, I came home to find the house covered in lights. Not just outside, inside too. She'd strung tiny lights across every doorway and window. He chuckled at the memory. Said she wanted to make sure I could find my way to her in the dark. Emily giggled. Did she make cookies too? Hundreds, Jack confirmed, his eyes crinkling. She'd bake all day and then ride with me on the motorcycle to deliver them to people who might be alone for the holidays. Laura looked surprised. She rode the motorcycle? In all weather, Jack nodded. Said it made her feel alive. He took a bite of pot roast. This is delicious, by the way. Family recipe, Laura said with pride. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Jack shared stories of Martha's garden, her volunteer work at the animal shelter, and how she could fix anything mechanical despite his teasing about it. She sounds brave, Emily said between bites of green beans. Bravest person I ever knew, Jack agreed, but she never thought so. Always said she was just doing what needed doing. As Daniel served apple pie for dessert, Emily suddenly asked, "Will you come to my school concert next month? I'm playing the recorder." The table went quiet. Jack glanced at Daniel and Laura, uncertain. Laura smiled softly. I think that would be nice, if Jack wants to. We could save you a seat with us, Daniel added, surprising Jack with the gesture. Jack felt something tight in his chest loosen. I'd be honored. And maybe, Laura continued, looking at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly, you could join us for Christmas Eve? We have a tradition of hot chocolate and driving around to look at lights. Emily clapped her hands. Please say yes. Jack looked around the table at these people who were making room for him in their lives. Martha would have loved that tradition, he said quietly. I'd really like to be part of it. After dessert, as Jack helped clear the dishes despite Laura's protests, Emily slipped her hand into his. Mom says families share stories so they don't forget important things, she said. Now we all have Martha stories to remember. Jack squeezed her hand gently. That's right. And maybe we'll make some new stories, too. The following day after school, Emily stood on Jack's porch, her backpack clutched against her chest. Laura waited in the car at the curb, giving a reassuring wave. This was Emily's first visit to Jack's home, to Martha's home, and her heart fluttered like the wings of the tiny cardinal ornament hanging from her backpack zipper. Jack opened the door, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Hey there, he said, his voice gentler than usual. Emily peered past him into the hallway. Hi, she said quietly. You can come in? Jack stepped aside, giving her space. I made cookies. Not as good as Martha's, but I followed her recipe. The house smelled of vanilla and cinnamon. Emily took small steps inside, her eyes traveling over everything. The worn couch with a crocheted blanket, the bookshelf with novels and photo albums, the potted plants in every window. Martha's presence lingered everywhere. Would you like to see your room first? Jack asked, watching her carefully. Or cookies first? Emily's eyes widened. My room? Jack nodded, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. If you want one here, you don't have to use it if you don't like it. I'd like to see it, she whispered. Jack led her down a short hallway past framed photographs, Martha gardening, Martha laughing beside a motorcycle, Martha holding a puppy. At the end of the hall, he stopped at a door painted soft yellow. I've been working on it all week, he explained. Daniel helped with the painting yesterday. When he pushed the door open, Emily gasped. The room was small but bright, with a twin bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a wooden desk under the window, and bookshelves painted white. A braided rug in shades of blue and green covered most of the hardwood floor. The quilt was Martha's when she was young, Jack said, watching Emily's face. Her grandmother made it. Emily touched the colorful squares reverently. It's beautiful. And look, Jack pointed to the windowsill, where 3 tiny African violet plants sat in a row. Martha would have wanted you to have these. She always said living things make a house feel like home. Emily moved slowly around the room, touching everything. The smooth desk surface, the bookshelf with a few children's novels already placed there, the small lamp shaped like a moon. I didn't know what else you might like, Jack admitted. Laura said you enjoy reading and drawing, but we can add whatever you want. Emily opened the small closet to find a rack with a few empty hangers and a shelf with folded blankets. On the top shelf sat a worn teddy bear. That was Martha's too, Jack said quietly. I found it in her hope chest. Thought you might want it, but if it's babyish. No. Emily reached for it, hugging it close. It's perfect. She turned to face him, and Jack was startled to see tears in her eyes. Is something wrong? He asked, kneeling to her level. We can change anything. No one's ever made me a room before, she said. I mean, I have a room at home, but no one's ever made one just because they wanted me to visit. Jack swallowed hard. Well, Martha would have wanted you to have a place here, and I want that too. Emily nodded, clutching the bear. Can we have cookies now? Jack smiled. Absolutely. They sat at the kitchen table with milk and slightly overcooked chocolate chip cookies, and Emily told him about her day at school while Jack listened, as if every word mattered. When Laura came to pick her up an hour later, Emily ran to the car, excitedly describing every detail of her room. Jack stood in the doorway watching, feeling something settle in his heart that had been adrift since Martha died. See you Sunday, he called. And my concert on Thursday, Emily reminded him. Jack nodded, waving as they drove away. He returned to the kitchen and washed their 2 cups and plates, placing them carefully in the dish rack to dry. For the first time since finding Emily in the cemetery, he could imagine a future stretching ahead that held more than just memories. It held promise. Months later, spring sunshine warmed the cemetery grounds. The snow had melted, revealing tender shoots of grass and early wildflowers dotting the earth between markers. Jack, Emily, Laura, and Daniel stood together at Martha's grave, which Emily had decorated with fresh daffodils. She loved yellow flowers best, Jack told Emily, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Because they looked like sunshine, Emily nodded, arranging the blooms carefully against the headstone. The 4 of them formed a small circle, no longer awkward or uncertain with each other. Winter had given way to a delicate balance, a new kind of family built on shared love for both Emily and Martha. Laura reached out to straighten the red scarf Emily wore, though the spring day was warm enough without it. Some traditions, they'd discovered, transcended seasons. I think she would be happy, Emily said softly, looking up at the 3 adults who now shaped her life. Don't you? Yes, Jack agreed, his voice steady and sure. I know she would. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.